The first meeting carried an intensity of silence, where eyes spoke with unshaken hunger and vulnerability. That silence wasn't empty. It throbbed with something unexplainable. A pull, stronger than gravity, a trembling that shook beneath the skin. His presence felt like a storm resting quietly on the horizon, waiting for the moment to break. And every second stretched into eternity as the air thickened with a tension too heavy to name. A gaze held too long became dangerous, a stare that stripped away layers no words could ever reach until the soul itself felt exposed, trembling naked before him. It wasn't the kind of glance that could be broken casually. It was an anchor, fastening two beings to the same pulse, forcing hearts to confess truths that lips hadn't dared yet whisper. In that fragile collision of sight, hunger surged, not only for flesh, but for something deeper, something eternal, the kind of connection that makes the body ache not just in desire, but in recognition. Vulnerability laced every second, making the moment feel raw, as though the world itself leaned closer to watch two flames prepare to merge. The air carried no sound but the thunder of breath, shallow and uneven, betraying the fire burning beneath fragile composure. Every part of the body screamed for closeness, for skin, for lips, yet the silence demanded patience, as if destiny itself insisted that nothing so sacred could be rushed. The weight of that meeting lingered not in spoken words, but in the way hearts stuttered, in the way blood surged hot through veins, in the way longing rose, not as a stranger, but as something achingly familiar, like home rediscovered after being lost for years. That first silence was not absence. It was the sound of two worlds colliding, of desire beginning to bloom in the shadows, of love announcing itself before either could resist. A single touch lingered longer than time, pulling hearts closer than skin, igniting fire beneath restraint. It was not rushed, not careless, but deliberate, like a secret being unveiled finger by finger. That touch didn't simply graze the surface, it carved itself into memory, branding the soul with a heat that refused to fade. Electricity shot through every nerve, an unspoken confession traveling faster than thought, and the body responded with a tremor that had nothing to do with fear, everything to do with surrender. The world outside disappeared. No voices, no movement, no sense of place. Only the magnetic pull between two beings who could no longer deny what was written into their very bones. His hand rested as if it had always belonged there, as though time itself had waited for this moment, and restraint became a fragile thread straining against the inevitable break. The warmth seeped deeper, flooding through veins, spreading like wildfire until every inch of skin burned with the ache of closeness. Desire unfurled, heavy and undeniable, yet it wasn't hunger for the body alone. It was hunger for the entirety of him, the soul behind the skin, the man behind the hand. That touch said things no language could capture. I see you. I want you. I need you. I will never let you go. Every second stretched, suspended in eternity, where the difference between a heartbeat and forever vanished, and restraint became an exquisite torment. The body leaned in without permission, craving more, craving all, trembling with the knowledge that this was no ordinary moment. The fire lit beneath the skin wasn't wild chaos. It was sacred, a promise sealed without words, a vow pressed softly into flesh. In that touch, two lives began to melt, merging into a single current, flowing stronger than any will to resist. The first kiss tasted of trembling confessions, where passion and love bled into one eternal moment. Lips met not with haste, but with a careful desperation, like two flames discovering how much brighter they could burn together. The sweetness of it carried the weight of every unspoken word, every hidden longing finally released into the open air. It wasn't simply a meeting of mouths, it was a surrender, a collision of souls that had been circling each other in silence for too long. The taste was fire and tenderness all at once, soft enough to melt, fierce enough to consume, leaving no part untouched by the intensity it carried. Every breath caught in the throat, stolen by the press of his lips, and the body gave itself over without thought, without resistance, trembling under the avalanche of feeling that came pouring out. It felt like confessing secrets never spoken aloud, like unveiling scars never shown, because each second of that kiss revealed more than words could ever dare. Passion surged, hot and urgent, but beneath it ran something deeper, steadier, more eternal, love. A love that wasn't new, but ancient, the kind that felt like it had existed long before this life, waiting to find its way back in the shape of this moment. The kiss stretched, unbroken, making time irrelevant, making forever feel like it had begun right then, right there, with two mouths pressed together in aching unity. Hands tightened, pulling closer, fusing hearts as bodies leaned into what could no longer be denied. Every tremor, every gasp, every shiver carried the truth of a bond that had already been written in blood, in fire, in destiny. The kiss was not a beginning, it was a remembering, an awakening of something that had always been, something that would never again be silenced. When lips finally parted, the world was not the same, because everything had changed in that eternal instant, and love had marked itself indelibly into flesh and soul alike. Desire rose not in haste, but in the slow unveiling of trust, need, and surrender. Heat simmered beneath the skin, but it wasn't a fire that demanded to be fed instantly. It was a flame that grew stronger with patience, with each unhurried breath, with every pause that lingered longer than reason. Hands wandered softly, reverently, mapping skin as though touching a sacred scripture, each curve and line treated like a verse worth memorizing forever. The body trembled, but not from fear. This trembling came from recognition, from finally being known in a way that stripped all pretenses and left only truth behind. Trust formed the rhythm, guiding every motion, shaping desire into something more profound than hunger, something more eternal than lust. Each sigh became a vow, each gasp a promise, and need no longer felt like desperation, but like gravity pulling two souls inexorably closer. Time slowed into fragments, where every second carried the weight of eternity, where each caress whispered devotion, each glance burned with reverence. Surrender wasn't forced. It was chosen freely, offered as a gift, as though the body had been waiting its whole life to lay down its defenses and let love in fully. The heat rose gradually, deliberately, weaving passion into the fabric of intimacy, until every touch became a prayer and every movement a hymn. Desire was no longer a fleeting flame, but a steady fire, burning with the certainty of love, consuming gently yet relentlessly, until all that remained was the truth of two hearts opening completely. In that surrender, passion became sacred, and love became undeniable, binding flesh and soul together with invisible threads that would never be broken. Bodies became language, each caress, each breath, telling stories words could never carry. The silence between lips was filled with the poetry of touch, a rhythm older than time itself, a dialogue written in fire across trembling skin. Fingers traced paths like sentences etched in heat, lingering at places where the soul was most fragile, where longing spoke without ever needing a sound. Breath mingled, uneven and heavy, forming verses of desire that rose and fell like the tide, pulling both deeper into an ocean that had no shore. Each kiss, each brush of skin became a confession, unspoken truths laid bare in the language of closeness. The body arched, not from need alone, but from recognition, as though every nerve understood it was finally being read in its native tongue. Every sigh echoed like punctuation, shaping the rhythm of a story too sacred for speech. The pulse quickened, writing chapters in heat and trembling, while every gasp translated into promises of forever. There were no misunderstandings in this language, no hesitation, only truth woven into the way hands clutched tighter, the way lips deepened with hunger and reverence at once. Time ceased to exist, because this language wasn't bound to hours or minutes. It was bound to eternity, to the merging of two beings learning each other through every movement. In that sacred dialogue, passion became scripture, devotion became ink, and love itself became the translator between flesh and soul. Every touch was a story of longing answered, of loneliness undone, of two halves finding their whole. And in that moment, the language of the body said more than a lifetime of words ever could, carving itself forever into memory, into blood, into being. The act of joining wasn't lust alone, but an offering, a devotion that sanctified flesh into forever. It began with a pause, a trembling moment where eyes locked and silence thundered louder than any cry, where the weight of choice carried more power than the fever of need. When closeness finally dissolved every distance, it wasn't driven by urgency, but by reverence, as though every movement was a prayer offered to something greater than desire itself. Skin met skin in a union that felt less like possession and more like surrender, not a taking but a giving, not a hunger but a vow. Each thrust, each gasp, each arch of the body was not simply an expression of passion, but a ritual of love, sanctifying the rawness of flesh with the eternity of devotion. The heat was undeniable, yes, the fire consuming and relentless. But beneath the burning was a tenderness that made every moment sacred, as though heaven itself leaned down to witness the merging of two souls through the vulnerability of their bodies. Nothing about it was careless. Every motion was deliberate, reverent, carried by the weight of a promise deeper than words could bind. In that joining, the body was not just body. It was vessel, temple, altar, each touch an offering, each cry a hymn. Lust alone would have ended in exhaustion, but this act of devotion left no room for emptiness. It filled instead, filled with love so heavy it pressed into the marrow, love so eternal it could never be undone. Flesh became forever in that union, the sacred carved into every trembling second, and the body, once separate, became whole only through the gift of the other. It wasn't lust. It was eternity written in motion, devotion painted in sweat and tears, forever born in the fire of joining. Love deepened through raw passion, as vulnerability turned into an unbreakable bond beyond mere night. What began as trembling touches and breathless surrender transformed into something stronger, something indestructible, a tether woven between two hearts that no dawn could break. Every gasp carried more than pleasure. It carried truth, the kind of truth that bleeds out when nothing is hidden, when two souls stand entirely bare before each other. The rawness of passion stripped away every wall, every pretense, every fear, leaving only a core of love so fierce it glowed brighter than fire itself. Bodies moved in rhythm not only for release, but for recognition, for communion, as if each thrust, each moan, was an oath sworn in the language of flesh. The night was heavy with heat, yet within that heat there was a softness, a sacredness, a gentleness that transformed passion into permanence. Vulnerability, once dangerous, became strength, the very thing that sealed the bond, making it unbreakable, unshakable, untouchable by time or distance. What burned between sheets wasn't confined there. It was carried into the soul, engraved so deeply it could never fade. Even the silence between movements spoke of forever, whispering promises that could not be undone, promises carried in the rhythm of love itself. There was no longer a line between passion and love, between need and devotion. They were fused, indistinguishable, one eternal current pulling both deeper into each other until separation was unthinkable. The night could not end it. Morning could not erase it, because what was created in that surrender, in that rawness, lived beyond time. It became bond, it became vow, it became forever sealed in the memory of touch, in the echo of passion that turned fragile vulnerability into the strongest chain love could forge. Even after the fire calmed, eternity lingered, proving love and desire could never be separated again. The stillness that followed was not empty, not silence, but a fullness that pressed into the soul heavier than any cry or kiss had before. The room was quiet, yet the air carried the echo of every gasp, every whispered vow made without words, still alive, still trembling between the sheets. Bodies rested, yet hearts continued to race, not from exhaustion, but from the realization that nothing had ended. Everything had only just begun. Skin against skin no longer felt like contact. It felt like fusion, like the line between two lives had dissolved, leaving only one heartbeat stretched across two forms. The warmth lingered, deeper than sweat, deeper than flesh etched into marrow, a fire that would not fade with cooling breath. Love breathed steady now, not frantic, not wild, but eternal. A constant flame that would burn quietly in the background of every moment yet to come. Eyes met again in the hush, and no words were needed, because the truth had already been carved into the night, unerasable, undeniable. Desire no longer stood apart from love. It was love, and love itself burned with desire, inseparable, eternal, indivisible. That night proved that the two were never meant to be different things. They were halves of the same whole, threads of the same fabric, bound forever in one flame. Even as the body stilled, even as the world outside prepared to intrude again, the bond held, unbroken, stronger than any dawn could weaken. The fire had not ended. It had transformed into devotion, into promise, into eternity. And eternity, once lit, cannot be undone.